だって君弱いもん。
Jogo is one of the disaster curses, some of the strongest curses in the entire series up until this point. Yet Jogo arguably has one of the worst reputations in the entire series, being called one of the most underrated to one of the most overrated to the least impressive curse in his class, with some questioning whether he truly even deserves the acclaim that he gets from those around him. This mainly stems from lasting memories of Jogo's most important fights, and power scaling arguments that evolve into something far less productive than what you'd expect them to be. These arguments have spawned claims anywhere from Jogo being slower than grade 1 sorcerers to him being one-shotted by Mahito. There's a lot of range there due to people not being educated on the subject, going off of vague memories or misinterpretations of Jogo's feats, even the more blatant things. Jogo has a total of 4 fights in the series, most of which were losses, with one of his most notable wins being on a technicality, which he would have lost had the fight gone on normally, all of which played a role in people questioning him being as strong as he's really made out to be. So why is he underrated? The disaster curses have an ultimate goal of wiping out every sorcerer in Japan and recreating the Heian era, or as they call it, the Age of Cursed Spirits. Seeing as the disaster curses are some of the most intelligent curses in the series, gaining consciousness and watching humanity before revealing themselves, this isn't the kind of plan that you go through with if you're weaker than the average grade 1 sorcerer. Especially in the case of Jogo, who was the original leader of the group. He would have to have strength greater than any of his fellow curses to be able to lead the charge on such a large goal, the ultimate obstacle in their way being Gojo, whose birth alone either sent the majority of curses into hiding or forced them to grow stronger in the shadows as a means of survival. As a special grade cursed spirit, he's meant to be above all grade 1 sorcerers and anyone below them in strength, with only the absolute peak of grade 1 sorcerers being able to contest him, with special grade sorcerers being able to wipe him out completely. Because of this, him being able to walk through Maki and Hanami but being somewhat comparable to Naobito isn't surprising. While there is a lot of range with special grade as a ranking and rankings in general, something that Sukuna even points out when facing a special grade finger bearer that he calls an insect in comparison to 10% of his strength, Jogo is easily on the higher end of special grade when it comes to cursed spirits. And that is more than evident when taking a closer look at his feats in the series. For those that disagree with this, despite the series having a clear ranking system and multiple fights where 2 or 3 grade 1 sorcerers or someone with equivalent strength are needed for one of the disaster curses, this is also referenced in this statement by the show's author, Gege Akutami, in the official Jujutsu Kaisen fanbook. The statement regarding special grades as a whole and alluding to the strength of its upper tiers. Cursed spirits with the highest classification who spread terror among mankind. They're the most dangerous cursed spirits. Many possess a level of intelligence that's equal to or higher than a human being's, and can use curse techniques. In the world of Jujutsu, those with a classification superior to grade 1 are considered special grade. But the individuals within this category present very varied combat abilities. A sorcerer must be special grade or at the very least grade 1 in order to exercise a special grade cursed spirit. Kenjaku even wanting to control Jogo's strength with cursed spirit manipulation, a sentiment that he never expressed when it comes to Dagon and Hanami. Jogo's main feats in the series being his destructive power, while Mahito's idol transfiguration has many different uses that Kenjaku can use to further his own plans like he did with the Culling games. Jogo having no soul or mind-altering hacks being pure destruction in its rawest form, implying that Kenjaku wanted Jogo for his strength, not necessarily to extract his curse technique as a one-time use, further cementing him above the rest of the disaster curses. The comparisons to Mahito mainly being rooted in Mahito having more impressive fights from a visual perspective against Yuji, and a statement made shortly before Jogo's death where Hanami explains why Jogo made Mahito their new leader. The decision being based on Mahito's potential to keep growing as time went on, not that he outscaled them to such a degree that it was the only decision to be made, with no indication whatsoever in the entire series that Mahito is stronger than Jogo by any means, which we will get into later. Jogo's strength is also evident by his intelligence, as when it comes to cursed spirits, intelligence is often a direct representation of a curse's strength. The weakest curses can't even speak. The slightly stronger curses can barely form a single word or a fragment of a sentence, while the strongest curses in the series are capable of coherent speech. Jogo being able to form battle plans and even outthink Hanami when it comes to not lowering his domain amplification, a decision that led to Hanami's death. Jogo's curse technique being described as spewing out high temperature flames and magma burning his targets in an instant, with a technique that drops a huge meteorite that can turn a whole town in all 4 directions into ashes and dust. Jogo's statement about his own domain expansion, where he says the average Jujutsu sorcerer would have burned up just by entering his domain, is even referenced by the show's author as being made because of him being extremely strong even by his own standards. Not even the author himself agrees with downplaying Jogo to some insignificant goon that's talked up as more than what he's worth. This sentiment is carried over into the Shibuya arc, where Jogo even earns the respect of Sukuna, the man that was so strong that the combined forces of every sorcerer in the Heian era were unable to defeat him. Sukuna being considered the king of curses and a natural calamity that would go down in legend as the strongest of the most vicious era that Jujutsu has ever seen, with his revival alone being enough to contest Gojo and possibly bring back the Heian era with his strength alone. This same man saying that Jogo is a strong fighter even compared to those he's fought in the last 1,000 years, from sorcerers to human beings to cursed spirits, everything. All that being said, Jogo is set up as one of the most powerful curses that the series has seen up until this point, being surpassed by some, but still among the top tiers in the verse. Sukuna believes that he's strong, the author believes that he's strong, and his feats back him up, along with how strong he would have to be narratively to even have a chance of completing these goals of restoring the age of Heian in the first place. With that out of the way, we can look at his feats to determine how strong Jogo actually is. Jogo's first fight in the series is against Gojo. Gojo being one of the strongest sorcerers in existence, being so powerful that Hanami runs away from him appearing in the sky during the exchange event. Kenjaku thinking that Satoru was too strong despite him fighting someone that could turn into a black hole that would have destroyed the entire planet. And Gojo's birth by itself making every cursed spirit in Japan either hide out of fear or grow stronger in the shadows for their own survival. Jogo, despite being warned that Gojo was far stronger than he was, set out to trap him inside of Prison Realm, or kill him, whichever happened first. Gojo wanting to interrogate Jogo and needing to beat him but keep him alive, as anything else wouldn't allow him to extract information. The fight between Gojo and Jogo being set to begin. During the fight, Gojo takes multiple attacks from Jogo in order to show what the gap between them actually was. Jogo being unable to do any significant damage to Gojo due to his defense, which infinitely slows down anything that comes near him. Jogo throwing out so many attacks and Gojo being seemingly unscathed leaves Jogo in disbelief, which prompts Gojo to explain his curse technique. This is important because of a clause in Jujutsu Kaisen called revealing one's hand, which makes a technique more effective than it normally would be when explaining how their abilities work to their enemies, directly amping every major attack that Gojo used on Jogo during their fight. The fight continues and Jogo is hit by Red, Gojo's reversal technique. Red being a technique that outputs twice as much curse energy as Blue, which is enough to mangle many foes beyond recognition. This being the same attack that Gojo used on Toji during the Hidden Inventory arc, which damaged him even then. Jogo's durability feat being even more impressive due to Gojo having an entire decade worth of more training, on top of entering a binding vow that amplified his strength even further. Gojo then teleports and grabs Yuji to have him witness Jogo in his own strength firsthand. Gojo claiming that Jogo is weak by comparison to his full strength, which is true. This angers Jogo, and the mere sight of Jogo being pissed off is enough to make Yuji shit his pants. Yet he's fully willing to fight Mahito on several occasions, both after Junpei's death and in Shibuya, never viewing him with that same level of fear or respect at any point in time. This isn't to say that Mahito is weak by any means, but it should be taken into account when comparing Jogo and Mahito so heavily. Gojo and Jogo exchange words and Jogo brings out his domain expansion. Jogo's domain being unique in the sense that it has two different deadly qualities. Where most domains either have a set of rules or a guaranteed hit ability, Jogo can kill people by activating the domain itself, without even having the need to use his guaranteed hit technique at all. The author goes over Jogo's domain in his own words and says the following: expanding into a scorching domain, just like the inside of an active volcano's crater. Even before the sure hit effect, the space is so dangerous that an ordinary sorcerer would be burned to death upon entering the domain. The domain's user can also launch a fatal blow with a single finger. If this flaming attack hits the target head on, there will be nothing left. This is backed by Jogo's own statement of his domain burning the average sorcerer alive from them entering the domain by itself, before he even decides to attack them. Something that Gojo protected Yuji from with his infinity, where he told Yuji that as long as he stays close, he'll be fine. There's a feat for Jogo in this scene where he counters one of Jogo's attacks that has caused many debates on Gojo possibly having infinite speed for reacting to an attack that's meant to be instant, based on guaranteed hits being instantaneous inside of Dagon's domain and the idea translating to everyone else's. Gojo being able to react to instant attacks in theory, making him far faster than anyone in the series by a ridiculously high amount. The author actually goes out of his way to clarify that this is not what's happening. In the official Jujutsu Kaisen handbook, Gege Akutami outlines that Jogo was testing the waters with Gojo by hurling a meteor at him, not the maximum technique that he used against Sukuna, something that Gojo counters with his own cursed energy. This isn't Jogo's guaranteed hit technique, but instead something entirely different. Gojo reacting to it, not doing anything that would make his speed higher than normal. Jogo's guaranteed hit still being unknown. I'll go more in depth on this topic at some point, namely in an upcoming video on why Aizen stomps Gojo and another one on Gojo versus Goku, although this is enough for now. Gojo then brings out Unlimited Void and traps Jogo in an infinite stream of information, all actions in life being forced upon him endlessly at once to the point where he can do nothing but die slowly. During the Shibuya arc, Gojo uses this same domain expansion for a total of 1/20th of a second, which is enough to flood the brains of the average human being with half a year worth of information, sending them into a coma for 4 months straight. Jogo surviving inside of Gojo's domain expansion for over a minute and a half in the show's runtime before having his head ripped off, and still having his mind completely intact, which is impressive by itself. This brings us to the end of the fight as Jogo is rescued by Hanami, and spends the duration of the Kyoto Exchange event recovering from the fight and planning his next move. Jogo isn't seen again until Shibuya, where he has 3 more fights in the span of a single arc. The first of these fights being Jogo, Hanami, and Choso versus Gojo. The objective of the fight being to survive against Gojo long enough to seal him inside of Prison Realm, something that would require him to be pushed mentally and kept in the same spot for 1 minute worth of time inside of his own mind, an objective that eventually ended up being successful. By this point, Jogo and Hanami have learned domain amplification, which they use to counter Gojo's Limitless, limiting both themselves and Gojo to using hand-to-hand combat. This works somewhat until Gojo catches Hanami for attempting to use a curse technique and rips off parts of its body, where he shows that he can counter domain amplification by strengthening his own curse technique, turning Hanami into paste. Nothing impressive happens for Jogo against Gojo in Shibuya other than him surviving a few direct attacks and unlocking domain amplification as mentioned earlier, making it time to move on to his next fight. Naoto, Maki, and Hanami are pressured by Dagon, that was in an entirely different part of Shibuya than Gojo and Hanami. Naoto taking the lead in the fight by activating his curse technique several times throughout the fight to slam Dagon around faster than he can even complete a thought, causing Dagon to say that Naoto with his projection sorcery is comparable to Jogo. This is the root of one of Jogo's most contested feats. Many people will try to downplay Jogo's speed by saying that Dagon doesn't know how fast Jogo actually is, despite Jogo being around him for what may have been the entire story. There's no evidence of Dagon not knowing how fast Jogo is. In fact, the statement and the amount of time that they spend around each other implies the exact opposite. You'll then hear arguments about how Naoto wasn't at his max speed when facing Dagon. The main gripe with this being that against Maki, Naoya explicitly states that he's going to use his max speed, whereas here, Naoto doesn't. This stems from projection sorcery users reaching their max speed with consecutive uses of their curse technique. This comes down to a difference in writing, where a writer doesn't need to explicitly state every single time that someone's trying their utmost with words alone, and instead can show you a visual of Naoto bouncing Dagon around like a ping pong ball with his curse technique throughout the entire fight. After Dagon pulls out his domain expansion and nearly kills Nanami, Maki, Naoto, and Megumi, Toji enters and murders Dagon for good, taking Megumi out of the building and leaving an injured Naoto and Ko behind. Jogo appears and is said to be on a completely different level than Dagon, with there not even being a comparison in their strength, something that Naoto and Nanami agree on at the same time. Jogo cremating Dagon's dead body before any of them even realized he was there. Jogo then blitzes Nanami, nearly killing him with a single attack. Nanami looking like a walking dead zombie after barely being able to hold on to his life. Maki is next, being burned by one of Jogo's weakest attacks in the series by a casual flame that couldn't even be fixed with a reverse curse technique, despite their best efforts. Jogo being dodged by Naoto in his initial attack with his projection sorcery, and being killed in a single strike by Jogo with 2 volcanoes to the back. Before getting into this, we need to define what blitzing actually is, because the term is used very casually in places that it doesn't often apply. Blitzing is completely outclassing someone in terms of speed. It is not being slightly faster than the other person. This is generally shown with one character being so much faster than another that the other person can't even see them move, showing that character A is on a completely different level that character B can't even come close to. That being said, Jogo blitzes Nanami and Maki in the Shibuya arc, and by extension, will blitz anyone that's remotely close to their level of speed. What this means in the context of the story is what places him on such a high level, despite many claims of him being lower than he actually is. Nanami is someone that's shown being relative to Yuji. Yuji, during his encounters with Todo and Mahito, rivals them in speed, even outdoing the entire Kyoto squad trying to kill him at the same time. Many people will try to downplay this by saying that because Naobito and Nanami were injured, the feat becomes invalid. Yet even though he's openly stated to be slower now that he lost his arm, when looking at the fight, he's blatantly able to still compete with Dagon, who's now being empowered by the environment of his domain expansion, making the Dagon that he's able to react to without his curse technique, which is what made him blitz Dagon in the first place, even stronger than the Dagon that fought a healthy Naobito, Maki, and Nanami a few chapters earlier, showing that even while they were injured, the difference wasn't significant enough to take them completely out of the category that they were in before. This means that if Yuji, Megumi, Todo, Mahito, the Choso that fought Yuji in Shibuya, Dagon, Hanami, the entire Kyoto squad during the Shibuya arc, Nanami, or anyone close to them in strength wanted to fight Jogo, they would be burned alive before they could even see him move, making it far more clear where Jogo stands in an actual hierarchy relative to the rest of the series. Even when taking Jogo's own words echoed by Hanami into account about Mahito having potential that can surpass all the disaster curses, this doesn't do anything to even remotely close the gap when talking about Mahito's instant spirit body of distorted killing, which according to this scan from one of the volumes, increases Mahito's strength by 2 times. 2 times differences in strength being almost negligible when comparing them to someone like Jogo, who already outscales Yuji by such a wide margin to begin with, as the difference between characters who can blitz another is often hundreds if not thousands of times of a multiplier, let alone a 2 times multiplier on Mahito that took him from being able to fight Yuji to Yuji being completely outmatched. For those that would argue that this instant spirit body of distorted killing was Mahito reaching this untapped potential, this is clearly not the case, as Mahito is nowhere near being at his maximum potential, still being completely new to his evolution and learning more about his abilities in the middle of the fight. So while Mahito's transformation was impressive, it is not the potential that surpasses Jogo by any means. If anything, it would help him survive a little longer in the matchup while still being completely unable to touch Jogo at any point in time. If you want me to go more in depth on Jogo versus Mahito later on, I will put a poll up on this channel after this video is released, so vote there if you want the most detailed answer possible, as it is an interesting matchup at the end of the day, and going into more detail will answer a lot of questions that many people have about the series. After leaving Naobito, Maki, and Nanami, Jogo rushes over to Yuji as he senses someone feeding him Sukuna's fingers, Yuji eventually being fed all of the remaining fingers that Jogo had, taking him all the way up to 15. Sukuna's full strength being 20 fingers, making this 75% of his full strength. Jogo previously being compared to 8 to 9 fingers by Kenjaku. Jogo being compared to an 8 to 9 finger Sukuna was an overestimation, which was even stated when the statement was made. A difference that's made clear when Jogo fights Sukuna on his own, with Jogo being stronger than a 3-finger Sukuna in Gojo's own words when fighting him, which is even backed up by Mahito saying the exact same thing. Equating him to 40 to 45% of Sukuna's strength is still far too much, the real number being somewhere between 4 to 7 fingers, which is between 20 and 35%. Sukuna at this point is so fast that he can cut off Jogo's arms before Jogo even realizes what happened to him, with his presence alone being something that Jogo can only compare to Gojo himself. Jogo eventually being challenged by Sukuna to a life or death match, with certain conditions. The condition being that if Jogo can hit him a single time, Jogo will win. During the fight, Sukuna blitzes and rips apart Jogo for his own enjoyment, Jogo being able to survive, regenerating himself constantly, releasing enough flames to blow up a large building and releasing his most powerful attack outside of his domain expansion, an attack with enough firepower to impress Sukuna himself, saying that if it actually hit him, it would have been able to damage him. The attack being able to level a large portion of the city, leaving nothing but ashes and rubble in its wake. Jogo being taken out by Sukuna in a battle of flames versus flames, given the final respects of Sukuna acknowledging his strength and fading out completely. While Jogo did obviously lose this fight, the level of survivability and maximum meteor scaling to Sukuna in any capacity is impressive in itself. To understand why that is, you have to understand how strong Sukuna actually is. Sukuna is the same fighter that was unbeatable even when being attacked by every sorcerer at once in the most vicious era in Jujutsu Kaisen's history. Being able to blitz special grade curses at only 10% of his strength, looking at them as insects even that early into the story. That being said, there is a lot of range when it comes to special grades. Finger bearers obviously not comparing to the disaster curses or anyone that scales above that. This is also why Mahito nearly being killed after being hit by Sukuna a single time when Sukuna was only at 15% of his strength is also relevant, with Mahito specifically going out of his way to avoid encountering Sukuna again when both he and Sukuna were far stronger during the Shibuya arc, to which in all honesty, Sukuna was likely still fast enough to attack him even in that moment, seeing as Mahito had an entire dialogue before leaving his presence. Sukuna looking at Mahito in a way that shows that he doesn't even consider him to be a valid opponent, thus not taking any action. This should be enough to confidently scale Jogo above Yuji, Todo, Mahito, the other disaster curses, and anyone that's remotely close to that level. So if you run into these kind of conversations again, run those arguments home. Jogo being clearly below characters like Mahoraga, special grade level fighters like Gojo, Sukuna, Kenjaku, Yuki, etc. Still being a top tier in the verse that would walk through many characters in the series today, while giving a hard time to some of the characters in the Culling games, if not killing them completely. Jogo's curse technique doesn't have an official name, but it is described in detail in the fanbook, with Akutami wording Jogo's technique as the following. From a crater set in his palm, the ground or the wall, he spews out high temperature flames and magma, burning his target in an instant. In addition, he also possesses a powerful technique called Maximum Meteor, which drops a huge meteorite that can turn a whole town in all four directions into ashes and dust. In the earliest parts of the series, Jogo's anger or excitement can cause the temperature to heat up the area around him. This is to the point where regular human beings begin to sweat and notice the heat. Jogo being told to calm down as Kenjaku didn't want him to burn down an entire restaurant, which he later did with a weak expression of his curse technique, murdering an entire group of civilians with no effort. Jogo's Ember insects make a one-time appearance in the series, and while many find this technique to be underrated, it's more impractical than anything else. The technique is impressive even in the eyes of Gojo, as it sends several insects flying at its opponents at high speeds, mixing an attack of sound and explosives, the shrieking sounds of the insects being made to disorient the opponent, and the explosion being meant to kill them while they're in that state. The most clear drawback of this attack being that in the anime, they take quite some time to spawn, with Jogo literally standing still the entire time that the process is happening. If this is a condition for using the technique, then anyone that's able to pressure Jogo would prevent him from even using it. Because of this, I don't think it's ironic that we never see it again at any point in time, especially considering the opponents, circumstances, and the pace of Jogo's fights after testing the waters against Gojo early on. Jogo also has a purple energy blast that he uses to blast both Gojo and Hanami. There has been some debate about this being the same attack, and when comparing the manga panels to the anime, you can see that they're the exact same thing. Even the weak flames that Jogo used against Maki being the same ones he used against Gojo in the beginning when he thought that Gojo wasn't worth taking seriously. Purple flames specifically can reach temperatures of up to 2,552 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just barely below the temperature of magma, which reaches 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, spawning volcanoes on walls and surfaces, with these volcanoes spawned by Jogo having enough potency to burn Naobito to death in one shot. Naobito being able to survive Dagon's Death Swarm domain expansion Shikigami for 1 minute straight after having his Falling Blossom emotion, which counters the domain's guaranteed hit, removed when he was sent flying by Dagon's punch. Jogo spawns these volcanoes on flat surfaces like walls and uses them to catch his opponents off guard, resulting in a quick kill. Jogo's Maximum Meteor is capable of leveling a large portion of Shibuya, even powerful enough to have damaged Sukuna at 75% of his strength had it been fast enough to actually hit him. the pinnacle of Jogo's Jujutsu techniques outside of his domain expansion, which Jogo can create with his bare hands. Jogo's domain expansion, the Coffin of the Iron Mountain, is strong enough to burn the average sorcerer to death from entering the domain alone. This is a benefit that many other characters don't have. For example, with every other domain shown in the series, someone like Maki or Toji can walk right out of it, since they can't be trapped by the barrier or targeted by the guaranteed hit. Meanwhile, Jogo's domain is in a completely different category, nearly killing all of its enemies by its activation alone. This isn't to say that Jogo would fry Maki or Toji before they could walk out of his domain, but it is something to think about when scaling him against other characters. The guaranteed hit, as mentioned before, hasn't been seen since the molten rock that Jogo threw at Gojo inside of his domain was a regular attack, as outlined by Akutami in the Jujutsu Kaisen fanbook. It's less refined than Gojo's domain, as Gojo is able to overtake Jogo's domain expansion with his own relatively easily. Jogo also believes himself that his domain isn't powerful enough to outdo Sukuna at 75% of Sukuna's strength, as he didn't even bother using it against him at any point in time. Sukuna pointing out that this is due to Jogo being mentally scarred by nearly being killed when he used it against Gojo. Domain amplification, which Jogo uses in Shibuya against Gojo, wraps the user's body in a fluid coat of curse energy that nullifies any curse techniques it comes into contact with, used to counter Gojo's infinity defense, forcing Gojo to resort to hand-to-hand combat. Limitations being that its user can't use their curse technique either. This is seen when Hanami takes down domain amplification to use its curse technique, something that Gojo takes advantage of to one-shot Hanami into paste. Gojo also implies that he can strengthen his curse technique to a level that overpowers domain amplification entirely, something that he never stated, implied, or even attempted against the inverted Spear of Heaven, meaning that the inverted Spear of Heaven is likely the superior option when it comes to nullifying curse techniques, giving Jogo the ability to throw flaming meteors that rip apart a large portion of major cities, the ability to spawn volcanoes that blast his opponents at will, a technique for nullifying the curse techniques of others, and a domain expansion that can kill enemies on contact before even showing what his guaranteed hit even is. That is all we have today for Jogo, but there will definitely be more of these in the future. So if you like what you just heard, make sure to like and subscribe, and as always, have a great day, guys.